Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be wrapping up the stats of everything I read in August and September. Now you may know that I moved kind of right at the end of August, beginning of September, and I haven't had internet for most of the month. I've just started a new year at college, starting a research programme, so it's all been very busy. So I hadn't had time to film my August wrap up, and then I didn't read loads in September either, so I thought I might as well just merge the two together. Hopefully it won't take too long. We'll see how we get on. So I'm not gonna do a massive introduction, I'm just gonna get on with it. So I'm gonna go through August first and then September. I'll very briefly mention my best and worst books of each month, and yeah, let's just get on with it then. So in August I read 14 books from more than 14 authors because one was an anthology of multiple authors and one was written by 2 people. The total number of pages I read from the books that I finished in August was 4,651, which gave me an average book length of 332 pages, which is not too bad. 13 of the books were less than 500 pages, so I earned £1 each for those, and one of the books was over 500 pages, so I earned £2 for that one. I will say now as well, actually, I'm not going to be able to hold up books because most of these were ones either I borrowed from the library and have returned, or borrowed from other people and have returned, or I was at my parents' house for a little bit in August, so I took a load of stuff home with me. So the shortest book that I read was But You Did Not Come Back by Marceline Loridan-Ivens, which was 100 pages long. I borrowed this from the library. It's a memoir. It was very moving, actually. It was about her experience. She was French Jew and was deported to one of the concentration camps when she was a teenager, and her father was also deported to the neighbouring camp. She was in the female camp, he was in the male one, and she came back and he didn't, so it was written as a letter to him, hence the title But You Did Not Come Back. So that was 100 pages. The longest book that I finished was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily and Danforth, which is another one I got from the library. That was 623 pages. So usually at this point I talk about everything I bought and tot up my budget for you. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do all the money stuff at the end, and I'm probably not going to go through individually all the books that I've obtained recently because I've also had my birthday in September, so I might do a separate haul for those anyway, but we'll come back to the accounts at the end and I'll let you know how naughty I have been in terms of book buying. In terms of publication year, one book was published in the 19th century and then the rest were all published in the 21st century. So the one book published in the 19th century was volume 2 of Les Miserables, Cosette, which I read in French. So that was published in 1862. That was the book that was published first. And then there were 3 books that I read that were published in 2021. For ratings, I gave 2 books 3 stars, 8 books 4 stars, and 4 books 5 stars. Book that took me the longest to read was The Basics of Hebrew Poetry by Samuel T.S. Goh. I picked this up for a class back in April time. I started it, used it for a couple of essays, but didn't get around to finishing it until the beginning of August. So that one took me 128 days to read. The book that I read the quickest was But You Did Not Come Back because it was quite short. So I read that in a day. So that gave me an average reading length of 27 days, which is pretty good. I like that to be less than a month. The book that had been on my TBR the longest was Les Miserables Volume 2, which was from my digital backlist. So I had that ebook since the 29th of January 2013, so that was 3,091 days. There were a couple of books that I had out from the library that I started reading pretty much straight away when I got them out. So that gave me an average length on my TBR of 346 days, which again is very helpful because I like that to be less than a year. I didn't actually make an official TBR for August, but 3 of the books were ones that I mentioned that I wanted to read in August. And again, I usually at this point would say how many are currently on my Goodreads TBR. I'm going to save that until I get to that point in the September one because I didn't figure that out at the end of August. Okay, so where the books came from. One book was from my physical backlist, one was from my digital backlist. 3 books were new to me this year. 5 books came from the library and 3 books were ones I borrowed from other people, and 1 book was from NetGalley for review. I usually like to try and read more from my backlist, but actually it's quite good to be clearing some of the ones that I'm borrowing from people because I'm borrowing a lot of stuff. So the format, 7 books were paperbacks, 4 were hardback and 3 were ebooks. For genres, 4 were Christian non-fiction, 1 was a classic, 1 was a contemporary. There was 1 gothic horror, 1 memoir, 1 non-fiction, 3 science fiction, 1 short story anthology, and 1 urban fantasy. 1 book was for a YA audience and the rest were for an adult audience. And then for publishers, there was quite a range, and 7 of the books were from Big 5 publishers and 7 of the books were from independent publishers. For the author nationalities, 7 were books from American authors, 2 were British, 2 were French. 1 book had multiple authors of different nationalities. There was 1 Norwegian and 1 Singaporean author. For author ethnicities, it worked out that 7 of the books were from authors of marginalised ethnicities and 7 of the books were from white authors. So it's about half and half, which is pretty good. I'm trying to work on increasing that number of books from not white people. So that's getting a bit healthier. For author genders, 5 books were from cisgendered men, 6 were from cisgendered women, 2 books had multiple authors of different genders, and there was 1 author who I think was genderqueer or non-binary. Their Twitter profile lists lots of different pronouns, so I'm not definitely sure how they would describe their gender. I have put them down as genderqueer, but I couldn't find anything to say definitively. For my challenges, 2 of the books were translated or written in foreign language. 1 book was for review and 1 book completed a series. So that was A Desolation Called Peace, which is the second and final book in the Text Kalynn duology by Arkady Martine. For author diversities, 7 books were from authors from marginalised ethnicities, 5 books were from authors from the LGBTQIA+ community, 3 books were from authors with a disability, 4 books were from authors who have shared their experience of mental illness, and 2 books were from authors with a neurodivergence. And then for character diversity, I hit all of those markers again multiple times across different books, which is really great. So that was August. Very briefly then, my least favourite book I read in August was probably a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton, which I borrowed from someone. I mean, I still gave it 3 stars, so it wasn't awful. There were a lot of good points in it. It was about how traditional forms of charity don't always actually help people in need because we just tend to throw money at the situation, and that can actually trap people in cycles of poverty because they then don't have the incentive to try and change their situation because they're getting handouts. So it was really interesting. I didn't agree with all of his points, but some of his points were, I thought, quite reasonable. Some of it was really interesting, but I didn't agree with all of it, which was why I ended up giving it 3 stars. I think my favourite book that I finished in August was probably This Poison Heart by Kalynn Bayron. I gave this 5 stars. This was the second book of hers I'd read, because I read Cinderella is Dead last year and I'd really enjoyed that, so I pre-ordered this one because I really like her writing style, and this was even better. I loved the characters, I loved the use of Greek mythology and how that was woven into it. It was urban fantasy. I really enjoyed the magic system, the drama, the emotion. I was so emotional reading this book, anxiously awaiting the sequel. It's a duology and the second volume comes out next year and I cannot wait. I really cannot wait. Kalynn Bayron is now pretty much an autobi author for me because I really loved that book. I'm not going to say a lot more about it now. I talk about it a bit more in a recent reads video, which you maybe will have seen by the time this goes up. I have no idea what my upload schedule is or what order any of the videos that I have already filmed are coming in, but you will see that at some point and I talk about it a lot more there. Yeah, so that was August. Now moving swiftly on, we're going to talk about what I read in September, which is a lot quicker because I didn't read as much. So I read 6 books in September from 6 different authors. The longest book that I read was The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry, which was 496 pages. The shortest book that I read was Half-Blood Blues by Edugyan, which was 352 pages. So they're actually all between 300 and 500 pages, all of the books that I finished. That gave me a total page count for all of the books that I finished of 2,412 pages, which gave me an average book length of 402 pages. All of the books, as I just said, were less than 500 pages, so I earned £1 each for each of those books. As I mentioned, we're going to come to the accounts right at the end. All of the books were published in the 21st century. The book that was published first out of all of those was a book called Michal by Jill Eileen Smith, which was published in 2009. It's one of the books that's forming essentially the core of my research. I'm going to be analysing this book and several other similar books. And then there were 2 books that I read that were published in 2021, which were The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth, Allison, Barr and Redemptor by Jordan Ifueko. So I gave 2 books 5 stars, 3 books 4 stars and 1 book 2 stars. See if you can guess which. The book that took me the longest to read was Michal by Jill Eileen Smith. It took me 153 days. I mean, I am reading it to analyse it, to study it, but I don't know if that is an indication of kind of the quality of this book that it took me that long. 3 of the books that I finished took me 5 days to read. I don't know what that says about what my September was like, but 3 books took me 5 days to read. So that gave me an average reading length of 32 days, really skewed by that 1 book taking me 153 days to read. The book that had been on my TBR the longest was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsah Faizal, which had been on my TBR for 808 days. And the book that had been on my TBR for the shortest amount of time was The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry, which I'd had out from the library for about 2 weeks before I started reading it. So that gave me an average length on my TBR of 320 days, which again, less than a year, very happy with that. 4 of the books were on my published TBR for September, 2 of the books weren't. So here we get to the point of shame. The last time I gave you a stat for the number of books on my TBR was at the end of July. I had 616. Bearing in mind that my birthday was in September, I've also had to buy a few books for uni and have been given a few other books as well, not just for my birthday, but in general. I figured it out and I'm not entirely sure I got included all of the stuff, like particularly the uni ones. Some of them I've already taken into my study in college, so I haven't been able to scan them onto Goodreads, but at the moment my Goodreads TBR is on 637. That is largely because, particularly in August, I wasn't reading very much from my own TBR. I was reading a lot of books I borrowed from the library or other people. I did a bit better in September. I read 3 books from my physical back list. 1 book was a new book that I bought this year. 1 book was a book from NetGalley and 1 was a library book. That was better, but I didn't read loads in September, so I wasn't really tackling all of these books that I was adding onto the TBR. I read 1 hardback, 1 ebook, and 4 paperback books. For genres, I read 1 Christian non-fiction, 2 fantasy, 1 historical fiction, 1 inspirational romance, and 1 urban fantasy. 2 books were for a young adult audience, and the rest were for an adult audience. And then for publishers, 2 of the books were from Big 5 publishers and 4 were from indie publishers. So actually for the year as a whole, I'm reading more indies than Big 5s, which is quite fun really. For author nationalities, I mean 4 were American, 1 was Canadian and 1 was from New Zealand. So they were all quite Western in terms of location where they live, but in terms of ethnicities, it was more mixed. So 3 were from marginalised ethnicities and 3 were white authors. For author genders, all of the authors that I read in September were cisgendered women. I mean, if you're going to stick to one gender, that's the one that I'd want to promote more, I guess. Yeah, I'm still trying to read more trans and non-binary authors. We're going to carry on working on that over the next couple of months, hopefully. For my challenges, I didn't do brilliantly with my challenges, but yeah, never mind. I read 1 review book. 1 book counted for Read Around the World, which was Uriah Heep, the authors from New Zealand, and then 1 book completed a series, which was Redemptor, the second part of the Bayron duology. For author diversity, 3 books were from authors of marginalised ethnicities, and then 1 book was an author who has openly talked about their experience in mental illness. That was the only 2 author diversity markers I hit in September, but I didn't read very much, so not a lot I could do about that really, apart from not fall asleep reading, as I did frequently during the month because I've been that tired. And then for character diversities, I did hit all of the markers, so marginalised ethnicity, LGBTQIA+, disability, mental health, and neurodivergence. So that was a bit better. Okay, my least favourite book, I don't think I mentioned earlier actually, I DNF'd 1 book in September, which was a book from the oldest on my TBR list called Culture of Honour. It's Christian non-fiction. I'm not going to talk about it loads. It was one that my undergrad uni church had done the rounds there, which was when I picked it up, but I hadn't ever got around to reading it. It came out of the Bethel church, which has been hugely influential on kind of the more charismatic side of the church, but more recently has kind of fallen out of favour a little bit, particularly I think in the UK because of their support for Donald Trump. So I was curious because I'd known this book had been really quite influential in my uni church, and I think more recently they've moved a little bit away from being hugely influenced by Beth. So I was curious, and some of it was all right, and some of it, there was one day I was reading it and like the face you pull when you eat something that tastes really, really awful and you can't believe you put it in your mouth. That was the face I was making some days when I was reading it. And I mean, I mentioned Michal, that was the other book that I didn't enjoy greatly. I gave it 2 stars. It comes out of this same culture, evangelical American culture, one being fiction, one being non-fiction. And the research I'm doing is looking at the story of King David as retold in evangelical romance fiction, of which Michal is one example. The point that I gave up with Culture of Honour, which is a non-fiction book, was when that story, King David's story, was essentially misused, badly interpreted to condone questionable behaviour, questionable leadership choices, condoned by misusing that story, which is kind of the root of why I'm doing the research I'm doing. I don't really want to say a lot more about it than that, but from the point I got to in the book, I could understand how they could become supportive of Trump, which has been a massive thing in American Christian culture, that I just don't understand. But anyway, we're not going to say anything more about that now. My favourite book. Let's go for my favourite book. I actually had 2, and one is kind of the antidote to that, so I am going to very briefly mention it. I had a review copy of The Making of Biblical Womanhood, which actually has already come out, and I didn't manage to read it before it came out, but I will be reviewing it soon on my blog. So this was by Beth, Allison, Barr, and she is looking at this patriarchal culture within American evangelicalism and trying to identify where it came from. And she's a medieval historian, but was also involved in some of these complementarian evangelical churches for many, many years. So had an insider view of that as well, and I found it really powerful and really moving. It's one I'm going to be buying a copy of it because I will probably be referring back to it during my research as well. And then the other book that I gave 5 stars to, which was probably what I would class as my favourite book of the month, was The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep by H.G. Parry. This book is just a dream come true for book lovers. It's a book about books. It follows a character called Charlie who can accidentally pull characters out of books when he's reading if he gets really immersed in reading, and then he discovers that he's not the only person with this ability, and that there's a whole host of different characters from fiction living on a street in the middle of Wellington in New Zealand, but it's a street that no one from outside, no one from the real world rather than only fictional people can find and live on the street. But there's another summoner, as they call themselves, who is bringing lots of villains out of books and is threatening the fabric of society. It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. I'm looking forward to reading more from H.G. Parry. I borrowed this from the library and will be getting my own copy. I'm tempted to get it for my dad for Christmas because I think he would probably quite enjoy it. That was my stats. I'm very, very quickly, because I've been talking for a long time, going to quickly go through my budget. I'm not going to mention all of the books individually. I think I'm going to do film a separate haul because, as I mentioned, I've been given loads of books as well. So I've got enough to constitute filming a haul, whereas usually I would just talk about them in my wrap-ups. Anyway, I bought 5 books in August. Most of them were secondhand. The one that I got new was Redemptor, I had on pre-order. And so I spent a total of £18.91 on books in August. At the end of July, I was on minus 69 pence. I earned £15 in August, so at the end of August, my budget total was minus £4.60, which wasn't too bad. In September, of course, I only earned £6, so that would have been fine if I hadn't bought any books, and I hadn't planned to buy any books, but then, you know me, some days I can't resist. Particularly on one day, I've been having a really bad day, so I ended up buying a couple of books in a charity shop. I bought 7 books in total, all of them were secondhand, and so I spent a total of £11.15, which means at the end of September, my total in my budget is minus £9.75, which isn't too bad considering how much in deficit I have been at other points in the year. So I'm going to have to try really hard not to buy any books in October and try and read a bit more to try and get that budget a bit more healthy. So that's the other reason again why my TBR has steadily increased as opposed to decreasing. So we're going to be working on trying to get that down a bit more by the end of the year, and we'll see how we go. So I think that's it for today. Let me know what your favourite things you read either in August or September were. Let me know if you've read any of the books I mentioned and what you thought of them, and let me know some of what you've been reading recently. Or if you just want to let me know that you've been here but you can't think of anything specific you want to say, or you just want to let me know you've made it this far in the video, then you can leave me a sleepy emoji, because I haven't read very much in September because I've been very tired and just would keep falling asleep reading. Yeah, you can also like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on my social media. All that information is listed for you in the description box below. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!